Thursday, everyone. We're so glad to have you here. We wanted to gather this group together to help us navigate what's been going on this year. This year's been so full of change and at times confusion, and that's really what we wanted to address more of today. So we know that there have been some conflicting reports and conflicting practices that have just been floating about with our Michigan businesses, and confusion just surrounding how we're meant to operate in these coming weeks, in these coming months, especially as we look at the fall and the winter. And know that Michigan rulings have also had different implications on what our safety practices and protocols should be for small and locally owned businesses. The other thing that we know, especially here at Local First and being in direct contact with so many of our members, is that you really value keeping your employees and your customers and your clients and all of those who are in your business spaces healthy. And so we've asked a few of our friends to come back from MIOSHA and the American Sustainable Business Council to really help us clear up some of that confusion and address that kind of deep concern that we have. So before we get started, let's just introduce who we have here. Several of these faces probably look familiar because we did host a reopening series back in June when many of our retailers and restaurant owners were opening their doors again post the shutdowns. And so we have several folks who are rejoining us from that conversation. You might recognize Sean Egan, who is here from the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, and Marta Johnson, who is the Michigan coordinator from the American Sustainable Business Council. And then from the Local First squad, we also have Hannah Schultz, who's joining us, president of Local First, and Jenny Schumacher, who is our membership assistant. And then for those who I have not met yet, I'm the membership director here at Local First, and we are all just glad to have you here today. So the other thing that we just know to be true right now is that there are a lot of things that hold our attention. There's a lot of things to be navigating in this season, and so we just have so much gratitude for our panelists who are showing up to help us navigate this conversation, and all of you who are tuning in to be a part of this conversation. So thank you so much for just taking that time to be with us today. One quick thing before we begin, we are just going to kind of jump in here as a panelist and navigate a few questions together, things that we're commonly hearing, things that we want to address, and know that others might have questions. So I think Jenny just shot a note in our group here, but Jenny can help lift up conversations and questions that are relevant to the questions we're answering here as a panel. We will hold some space here at the end for questions. And so if you have other questions outside of what we're discussing at the moment, hold on to those for that time, and we can address them more specifically then. So yeah, let's go ahead and just jump in and help to navigate some of these common questions that we have. The thing that I do want to open up with today is just for anyone on our panel, what are some of those common questions that you are hearing, and what are the ways in which we're helping to answer those? So what are some of the things and resources or answers that we're providing for those common questions? Pretty broad one.
So from a workplace safety perspective, first, Kathleen, let me just say, and to Hannah with Local First, Marta, great to see you again. It's been great working with all of you. I know that from the outset of all of this, your members were always looking for things that they could be doing rather than trying to find out what they have to do. And that's been wonderful, and it's been a great partnership. If you don't know, I'm extremely available, and I try to be quick with answers and help. And I appreciate all that you're doing out there for our communities and for your workers. When we created the emergency rules, we tried to stay consistent with what you are experiencing under the executive orders that fall within that workplace safety space, and tried to include those things that we anticipated being in place for the next 6 months or so, because that's about how long emergency rules go, and then you can extend them out another 6 months. So looking at some of those things that could change, like capacity limits, customer masking, which is a stretch, the contact tracing that we're going to talk about probably today, those are going to stay with DHHS, and I know you're trying to navigate those. Common questions, and I think that your members and businesses are much ahead of the game here, is, what do we have to do? And certainly you have to have a plan. You have to have a written plan of what you're doing in your workplace. Most of you have those. We have a template on our COVID workplace safety website. And then the other question I get is, what do I do when I have a positive? it's absolutely critical that you contact local public health when you have a positive, and they're going to help you do the contact tracing. So I know some employers think that they have to do it. You don't, but you do need to notify those employees that may have been exposed to that person, and then jump right into that isolation and quarantine as quickly as you can based on your determination. So, and then, of course, the deep cleaning and other things that you need to do, but you're all very familiar with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And Sean, just to kind of clarify a point there too, what are the best ways that you know of to get in contact with those officials when there is a positive result?
So talked with local public health across our communities. Kent County has been much, I wouldn't say much more engaged. They've just been great about communicating out to the public what they expect. Most of them, it's just a phone call. And for like a record keeping requirement for workplace safety, just make a note that you made the call. You don't have to get, anything formal from public health or anything else saying, hey, Sean actually called me. You just make a note. Because if your employer were to complain, MIOSHA would have an obligation to investigate, right? So they're going to ask you, did you contact local public health? You're going to say, yes, I did on Thursday at 11 o'clock. And that's good enough. But most of them want a phone call. I don't know if Kent County has like an email maybe or something, but it's usually pretty simple.
Okay, awesome. Are there other common questions that are popping up as individuals are chatting with business owners on either the practical, tangible, how we're running our business side of things or the policy side of things?
Are these all for me? Or is everybody else muted?
They're open to anyone.
No, I was just going to say, I think a lot of people, and I'll go into depth more on this later, I think a lot of businesses are interested in more clarity on how to finish up the requirements for any PPP that has been secured. I think there is also a huge gap that remains for businesses that didn't find that mechanism very accessible. Or weren't able to access that financial support and are looking for more support to be able to navigate a tough winter, both from the perspective of not being able to use outdoor opportunities as much, to be able to expand production closer to where it might have been, for not only supporting employees, but just staying afloat and managing all of the managing better than being able to get a profit from all of the ongoing expenses that a business faces. But also because we're seeing a sharp increase in cases, flu season, cold and flu season is upon us. And there are signs from, at least, amongst Michigan, some stress on our hospitals and concerns to make sure that we have all of our systems kind of stable and able to do what they need to do. So I think a lot of people that I hear from are concerned about, what is a future relief package going to look like? We saw a few proposals come out of the House, and none of them were taken up by the Senate, and negotiations seem to be a little chaotic between the House and even Stephen Mnuchin's office. So I think people are really interested in knowing what future relief might be possible. I think the status of paid leave as an inclusion in the package, the initial group of packages for relief that included at least a basic coverage of paid leave for COVID-related or even like perceived COVID-related illnesses, because there were concerns that people couldn't access testing all the time, especially early on in the pandemic. So I think people are really concerned about kind of basic programs that help stabilize public health, but also help businesses not have to navigate all of those weights on their own. And so those are some of the questions that we're getting and have over the year. And I think there are some really valid concerns on, trying to improve on what we did this year. I think, we should really feel good about being able to have any bipartisan agreements come together. Those have been rare over the past 4 years, and I think that's something to celebrate. But there's definitely room for improvement, especially from a business perspective, and for particularly small businesses. So I think those are the things that I hear about the most. And we are working at I work directly with the American Sustainable Business Council, but also partner with all sorts of wonderful organizations here that want to make sure that business leaders understand some of the nuance of these business related policy, or these policies that impact business interests, but also just our goals for a better state and community. So helping them get connected to communicate with decision makers and encourage continued partnership and movement on these important policies that will provide badly needed relief for our communities and businesses.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that, Marta. It's so great to hear how you've explained that too, because I was recently connecting with a health professional who was talking about how common it is for us to say, I can't wait for 2021 to get here. I can't wait for 2020 to be over. And to your point too, there is such a need to continue what we're doing or how we're improving these systems into the next year. So I'm appreciative of that kind of reminder as we're coming up on the winter season here too. Perfect. Hannah, is there anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, thank you. I would echo both Sean and Marta. I think the conversations that I've had have centered often around not only helping to keep employees safe in terms of their physical health and their, making sure that cleaning protocols and all of these kind of day-to-day tasks are being handled, but also navigating challenging customer interactions and kind of creating a unified understanding and expectation from everyone's perspective, not only from the business owner's perspective and an employee perspective, but also from an individual. And all of us are experiencing every interaction very differently, I think. And it's hard to settle into that at times. I know, me personally, a change in routine can really throw me off sometimes. And so when I want to go to my favorite local business to see some of my friends, or to see to maybe buy myself something, or buy a gift for someone, or whatever the interaction might be, when that experience is extremely different than it was 6 months ago, or that can be really challenging and jarring for folks. And I think we're seeing the repercussions of that being taken out potentially on, or certainly on, those frontline employees who are kind of there to keep the establishment open, keep the ball rolling forward. And so we're seeing our business owners taking on a lot of those responsibilities, which is taking them away from seeking out potential funding opportunies, to Marta's point, and taking them away from those more strategic behind the scenes, meetings and decisions that they need to be engaging with. And so, I think it's just a worth stating in every opportunity like this that we all need to kind of give grace and treat people with respect, because at the end of the day, business owners are just doing what they need to do to stay open. So.
Yeah, that's such a great reminder too. I know here at Local First, we talk a lot about locally owned businesses as being one of the key factors in creating a vibrant and unique place to be, which is an amazing thing that locally owned businesses can do, but it also has a hefty weight, particularly in seasons like this. And so it's really important to have that mindfulness as we're going into these spaces. Great, thank you all. The next thing that we
really quick, do you see this question that we just had come into the chat here from Mark Carey?
I did see notification, but go ahead and can you read the question for us?
If we could, I think it's a good question to not save till the end. What are the legal ramifications for businesses and individuals who choose not to enforce health department quarantine recommendations? And are there differences between healthcare providers and other businesses from a legal perspective? So I think that's to ask, are consequences or enforcement protocols differing from one industry to the next in terms of how we are practicing and keeping up with all of these new requirements?
Sure. I'll jump on that one unless anybody else wants to take it, but I think there is some overlap between some of the DHHS requirements and the MIOSHA rules. So I'm going to talk about both briefly. So DHHS, as everybody is aware, has given authority to local public health as well to enforce their orders. So there are an emergency rule was issued from DHHS that includes some civil fines for non-compliance with their orders. And I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but I want to say it's like $1,000 a day potentially that you could be fined. Now, within the MIOSHA rules, we also have quarantine and isolation for employees required. And this is when you violate a MIOSHA safety standard in the workplace, it's not our goal to penalize people. Let me just kind of always say that. But if you're just not going to comply, that can result in a citation, a penalty of up to $7,000, and you're required to abate the hazard, which would mean that you have to comply with that quarantine and isolation. And that's the most critical part. And our rules do refer to CDC guidelines on quarantine and isolation, and for certain critical workers, there are some differences. So healthcare workers under the CDC guidelines have some differences that they can have for quarantine and isolation. So do some other critical infrastructure industries, but those are going to be very specific. So I know there's like food and agriculture in there. That's really talking about food processing and direct agricultural work, not necessarily way down the chain. So grocery workers are not critical infrastructure workers. Now, under our prior executive orders, we had like essential workers and stuff like that. That's not out there anymore. So we're really deferring to that critical infrastructure document.
That's great. Any other feedback for that particular question? Awesome. That is a really great question to clarify. Thank you so much for raising it, and Sean for helping to answer some of that as well. The next thing that I know we were hoping to chat about here this morning, and we've already discussed it to some degree, so if there are additional things that folks want to add to this space, one of the things we're hoping to address is what folks really need to know critically about current safety protocols. So I know we've addressed a few of those, whether that be from the MIOSHA end or the things that people are wanting to have to fulfill, but also the things they want to do above and beyond to create safety in their spaces. But if there were some things that you could share for our locally owned businesses, what do they need to know about the current safety protocols and the changes that have been implemented here in the last several weeks?
Yeah, primarily what I encourage everybody to do is start with those MIOSHA rules. Go to our COVID workplace safety website. There's a template plan there if you don't have one. There are guidelines for every type of industry there is pretty much, and focus on those. So the rules look different than the executive orders, but pretty much things that made sense are in there. So those guidelines will really help you kind of focus in on what needs to be in place. It's critically important that you're doing those daily health screenings of employees. You can use My Symptoms app, which is free, or other tools that you may have. And then recognize that there are industry specific requirements. So you still need to have those posters up. You need to be requiring customers to wear masks until they're seated and eating. We understand the challenges and have heard you on the challenges with that. We do not want to create hazards for you. So if you have somebody that's just not going to comply, we do not expect you to try to pick them up and carry them out of the joint. We understand that. But so you're not going to get penalized as long as you're making a good faith effort to comply. Some of those things going above and beyond. We did a 4-part series on HVAC with ASHRAE, which are the engineering gurus that write code and everything else, on changes you could consider that include more air changes per hour, higher grade filters if your system can handle it, and some of those other tools. That's posted on our Leo YouTube page if you want to check that out. Some great information there. That's really, as we're all indoors now, I'd say, you know, we've been saying heading indoors, but it's been cold other than this week. So we're all indoors now. We know that as the humidity drops, the virus can hang around longer because it you know, when it connects to a more reasonable 40 to 60% humid room, it's going to gain weight and fall quicker. When that's taken away, which happens in Michigan in the winter, it can hang around longer. So that those air changes per hour, getting that air out of the building, adding portable HEPA units if you can't do that, stuff like that will help mitigate the hazard. Not a panacea, but it can help and make those workplaces a little more safe. And then certainly, at least for employees, the things that you can control have to be wearing those face coverings. It reduces transmission by as much as 70%. So it's just critical that we're all trying to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. Anything else that others would want to add? Those resources, Sean, are invaluable. We'll definitely make sure that when we share out this recording, that we will link to some of those pages for ease of convenience for individuals. Anything else folks want to add for that question? Okay. One of the things too, and I think Shauna speaks to what you were also just discussing, but we've seen here as things are changing in our community too, that there is some confusion specific to contact tracing within our businesses here. Whether that's something that's required, how that information is held, what businesses need to do with that information once they have it, how we're contacting folks, just kind of the myriad of questions that come with that. But wondering if you or others on the panel can speak to the recent changes with contact tracing within our businesses, who's required to do that, and why are we seeing that change within our business spaces?
I don't want to commandeer the whole presentation, but I'll jump in here first, I think. So most of the contact tracing information that you're required to do, now certainly for employees, you have to do that, right? You need to know who's in there. You're going to know who's working around each other. You're going to be able to do that part. That's just something that's going to be part of your normal process. Much of the public-facing contact tracing is going to be in the DHHS requirements. And as you all know, and the reason you're asking the question is about a week ago that was enhanced to include restaurants and bars. And there's some questions that I've received that you're getting as well. Is that one person at the table, or is it everybody? Is it, what scope of information is it? Just phone, name and phone? Unfortunately, I don't have the answers to those questions yet. So I know that Marta and probably Hannah, and maybe you, Kathleen, Jennifer, are lobbying pretty hard every day and trying to get answers on different things. So I don't know if you've heard something different, but I don't have answers for that just yet.
So far, my experience has been, and it's been limited, but that there is one person per party that needs to provide name and phone number. And I haven't seen anything beyond that or heard of anything beyond that, but that has been the practice that I've been aware of so far.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about some of these changes, and I think we should, as a business community, expect more of them, because I think as we enter another phase of this virus, no matter what, I mean, this week is going to kind of decide what leaders will be in office and that we'll be working with in 2021. So one, there could be changes there that will change the approach that we have to fighting COVID and responding to the pandemic. But I think it's good to expect that changes are going to happen regardless, because the nature of this is changing. I mean, if you just look at those bar graphs, we're just going almost off the page right now in terms of where our caseloads are. And I think, or positive testing and caseloads and all that. And I think the important thing for the business community to do right now is to expect that changes are going to happen, and to also continue to remain in dialogue on understanding why and how first before kind of processing fully all of that and then putting things into place. Because I think what some businesses are dealing with right now is they're responding to these changes, either in no matter what way it's happening, but it's resulting in a lot of customer backlash and confusion. And I think what we would like to see as a business community happen is that this is really a shared effort that is both from all of our leaders, whether Republican or Democrat, in terms of the cultural shift to embrace strategies that will help us protect people's health and keep our community stable and our businesses going. So I think that expect changes and just know we're all working on trying to figure out. So I think reaching out to Hannah, I'm happy to be a resource as well to figure out and continue to advocate on solutions that will improve both the ease and effectiveness of these, because I think as business leaders, it's not just about fighting and saying, no, we don't want to do that. It's about saying, this might work better if X or if Y. And I think coming to the table with alternatives is a really important part of helping shape better outcomes. And so those are the ways that I looking to continue to remain in this space. I think I am delighted to see changes in responding to this pandemic, because I think, just as a person that looks at data a lot and that sort of thing, I think that it's important, but I also, always look to balance that with what's going to be most effective and keep people at the table to continue to be able to have our businesses functioning and our schools functioning and our hospitals functioning. All these things are critically important, and maybe things that we've been taking benefit without much appreciation for for a long time. But in this pandemic, I think it's so critical for us to continue to ask questions and continue to show up with specific ways in which we think things could improve. So we're really open to those conversations and we're looking to them, but expect contact tracing to be a big part of fighting this pandemic. And the more we can come together to figure out how to do that effectively together, the better off we'll all be.
Yeah, that's great. And such a good reminder for the season too, as we're coming up on what can be great change for the spaces that we're in.
And I should have looked before we got on today, and I did not, but DHHS has posted a Q&A on contract tracing specifically, and it does have most of these. And then on the question, and there's a long list of who has to do it, it's in the Q&A, as well as who at the table and things like that.
Awesome. That's really helpful, Sean. We'll be sure to link to that, especially so folks can see that. And knowing that it'll be a resource that's updated regularly, that is really helpful too. So it's something you can go to as things continue to shift. Marta, I'm hoping to kind of jump back to some of the pieces that you had just been lifting up. There are, of course, so many things that are going to be changing, whether it's specific to this week or in the coming future, surrounding some of the policies that we've seen. And so I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to that, what you're seeing happening currently with some of the policies and relief funding that are either happening now or could be possible, and what we can expect in that space, as well as, if you're able, what it looks like for the businesses to lift their voices up to be able to be a part of these processes.
Awesome. No, this is what I live for these days. No, I think that I think there's lots to be optimistic about in terms of opportunities for more policies, no matter who is elected. I think there are a few, and I don't want to be ignorant of the fact that there might be different policy perspectives from different candidates, but I think that with some pending dates and with the overwhelming feedback from business leaders as well as just everyday people, I think that we have a real opportunity to get another relief package. And one of the dates that I'm looking at is going to be, I think it's December 11th or December 4th, which is the day that our continuing resolution for the budget that was passed back in, I think it was March or February, to continue to allow us to have a functioning budget for our government, is going to expire. And so that's a real deadline, even though it's happening during lame duck. So you have, mostly the same decision makers. I think it's possible that Mark Kelly might be Senate at that point, which would change a little bit of what's happening in the Senate in DC. So I think, that's going to force the conversation on a lot of these relief bills. And what I think in terms of what I've been hearing business leaders most concerned about is the equity and access to relief dollars. And one of the items that we're paying close attention to is something that Congressman Kildee noted, it was last week or the week before. Time is really moving quickly for me these days, but he noted that there's going to be about a $15 billion segment of relief bill that we focus on micro grants, not loans, but grants, and they're targeted to be able to improve access, especially for minority-owned businesses, Black-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, businesses that have found the Pay Loan Protection Program to be inaccessible and maybe just not as useful when they have super thin margins or the types of businesses they run, that sort of thing. So we'll be looking to that. We'll also be looking to the extension of paid leave that expires at the end of the year. And there's been the FICRA program has allowed a mechanism for businesses to offset the cost, so they don't have it all on their payrolls. I do think we might have an opportunity to move forward something on a federal paid leave, which would be, you know, something that could be not only addressing sick time, but also, you know, a badly needed update to our programs on benefits that would update us to be more in line with other developed countries, and, you know, provide a mechanism during this very tense time during a pandemic where there's a lot of relief that's needed for families to be able to use programs like that. So I think those are the things that we're paying attention to. I think this December is going to be an opportunity. I also think that there will be an opportunity in 2021 to kind of bust out of some of this gridlock that we've been seeing, potentially with new leaders. I think that might make it a little easier based on some of the campaigning and policies that they're advocating for. But I do think that there's a potential. And I think the way that we work, that I work with business leaders, is to help connect them with ways to express their voice, both in a public setting, like with op-eds and that sort of thing. I think that really is valuable, but also directly to legislators who are making the decisions. They are really wanting to hear from business leaders that care about issues, that care about and practically can speak to what works and what might be a challenge for implementing in their own businesses. And I think the more that we have business leaders that really want to do the right thing for their employees and be a part of a thriving and vibrant community that's equitable and sustainable, I think that engaging in some of these policy issues not only strengthens our business community, but it just strengthens all of our goals and gets us more to where we want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Marta, for sharing that. Can folks get in contact with you then directly if they're interested in some of those pathways to voice their concern or become more engaged?
Yeah, I'll pop my email address in the comments.
You know, I think as we're kind of closing out here and moving into some more space for questions, if folks have those, so if you're eager to ask some questions from Marta or Sean or Hannah, please make sure you're putting those into the chat function, and Jenny can help us navigate that in here in a couple of minutes. But as we're moving into that space, I just kind of want to open the floor for, you know, the big takeaways that you might have for our locally owned businesses or our owners who are making some of these decisions on the ground, where people can find more information from your organization. So we'll definitely post the things that we've already chatted about, but if there are places, whether it be on your website or other spaces that folks can navigate your resources, we want to hear about those. So just want to open it up for resources and some of those big takeaways.
Sure. I think from a state perspective, you know, we're trying to look at every possible angle. We have a Operation Hibernation, we call it, where we're trying to make sure we provide info. And I think you might see some possible grant programs come out to support some of the efforts to maintain your ability to have customers, like more customers. I know some communities are thinking tents and things like that. I would mention that I talked with the fire marshal, and if you're talking tents, you need to talk to your local fire department and make sure that you're doing those things that are required there. But certainly one of the things that came up on the HVAC webinar, just to make you all very aware, is I had Consumers Energy and DTE join us, as well as Michigan Saves, because some of these things qualify for rebates or incentives. So make sure you check them out, because changes to HVAC systems may include more energy efficient components. So they had a lot of 0%, they had a lot of straight incentives, they had some rebates, some other things that, so if you're thinking about that, make sure you check in there and just keep watching. I think, you know, we're talking with all of you all the time and hearing what's going on out there and really trying to accommodate the best that we can. We know that it's a battle, right? We have these voices saying these things help, and we have strong voices saying we don't need to do anything, that you're trying to navigate with your customers and in some cases employees. And we get that too. It's you know, it's going to be a challenge moving forward into the winter where you're going to continue to hear the same guidance from us, right? Congregation is bad, separation is good. So do your best and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to keep it going that way.
Awesome. Great. And Marta, any big takeaways on your end or places that folks can find more information from the American Sustainable Business Council?
Yeah, absolutely. I would, you can check out our website, asbc.org, I believe, or if you just Google American Sustainable Business Council, they're tracking federal issues. We're working on getting a website together. We're actually, because it's a coalition of partners, it won't be ASBC specific, but I'll be helping facilitate it, called Business Leaders for a Better Michigan. So we'll be having a site there that people can go to find out more information on Michigan specific issues, but I know we'll also be paying attention to federal issues as well, and continuing to find ways to help business leaders not only learn and understand what policies not only could affect their business, but that they could speak into as business leaders to help make a difference, but also just what things are going to be tied to goals that we have for people, planet, and prosperity. So we'll have a website coming soon, but for now, American Sustainable Business Council will give you some at least federal information on some of the hot button issues they're tracking related to budget, relief package, paid sick leave, all of these kind of like critical things for our moment in time that we're in right now.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, I can't wait to see more information about the Business Leaders platform that you're creating too. That sounds amazing. And then here on the Local First End, I know we have several things going on, of course. This is part of our effort to keep folks informed. And we will have this in a blog space so you can access these resources. Another thing that we are gearing up for, to kind of point back toward Marta and Sean, what you both were discussing earlier, is access to funds and initiatives. We are going to be part of a technical assistance support program with the City of Grand Rapids. Hannah, could you kind of give us an overview of what that might look like here in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kathleen. So Local First, along with our partner organizations, Grand Rapids area Black businesses and the West Michigan Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and a few others, are going to be working directly with the City of Grand Rapids, who the City of Grand Rapids was able to capture some CARES Act funding from Kent County, and they're going to be distributing that CARES Act funding in the form of small grants, kind of micro grants, to, again, micro local businesses, targeting businesses that are most vulnerable or have affected by the pandemic in a way, in one of the strongest ways. And so we're going to be working directly with them to help businesses through the application process, to talk through how businesses can apply for those funds, how they can use those funds for what they need them for, how best to leverage those funds into some stability as we move into the winter months. So that's going to start around mid-November. We're going to have some tutorials around what sorts of documentation or information you would need as a business to apply for these grants. And we're going to help get as much of that money into the hands of our local businesses as we possibly can. So stay tuned for more information about that as we learn. The application is not yet live. So as soon as we have that application, we will be letting folks know, and we'll be hosting more touch points, webinars, tutorials, et cetera, on how to apply for those funds. So stay tuned to our emails and our website so that you can know when all that's going to be available, and we can help you get some of that.
And we do have some time for questions. I know we've got a few folks who are still here with us. So if anything else, if we missed anything in our conversation here, we definitely want to be attuned to what questions are out there. So definitely feel free to pop those into the chat here, and Jenny can help us navigate those. We'll just give a few minutes for that space, and if nothing pops up here, we'll certainly make sure that we have open lines of communication to Sean and Marta and Hannah and our team here at Local First, so that folks can continue to ask some questions. So we'll just wait a minute or two to see if anyone has any questions now.
Yeah, while folks potentially are typing away into the chat, I just want to thank the two of you, Sean and Marta, for particularly highlighting all of the different opportunities for businesses to stay on track, keep up with different changes, and just to stay mindful and open to these as things that are available for them to do rather than barriers to their business, because keeping our communities healthy and informed is part of keeping our businesses going and happy as well. So making all those connections was really particularly useful for me as I tend to connect with all of our business owners and get some of their feedback about from how things might be going from Tuesday to Wednesday. And so, you know, a customer coming in can make all the difference in the world. And these resources are a big part of that effort. So I do want to thank you, especially.
Well, it looks like there might not be too many outstanding questions here today. So we will just make sure that we make our inboxes available to folks and get those resources out there. Yeah, would want to, of course, just echo what Jenny is sharing, and that we know that this is an incredibly busy, overwhelming season. And so we're just really grateful for your time here, Sean, Marta, and the Local First crew, and those who tuned in just to get these resources and to really care about the ways that we're operating our businesses for the sake of our communities. And so we'll be sure to, again, put all of that up on the Local First blog. So stay tuned for that. We'll share it out by email as well. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
For the rest of your days.
Have a good one.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Thanks, Sean, Marta, Jenny, and Kathleen. Thanks very much.
Bye.